I think we're up and dialed in. Okay. It should auto-populate on our Twitter, too, if folks want to tweet that out. It's not doing the auto tweet anymore.
Two balls and a strike to count on Taylor. Reyes fires, swinging a drive, deep left field. It's his way back. Welcome on, Chris Taylor.
What's up, everyone? Welcome into DodgerHeads, presented by DodgerBlue.com. My name is Jeff Spiegel, joined today by Matt Moreno, Justin Lorber, and it's a sad day for baseball. Officially, as of today, opening day has been canceled. The first week of games have been postponed. Matt, I'll start with you. Just give me an emotional sense of where you were. There was some optimism last night in a lot of corners, and then we wake up this morning and not so much.
Yeah, I mean, going back to Monday night, late Monday night, you kind of started to feel like, okay, you know, they're going to get this done somehow, some way, right? Like they kept negotiating late into the night in Florida. And I know that even with the reports coming out from multiple reporters that, hey, there's some progress, this could get done, the union was still pushing back on that and saying, you know, there are actually still some pretty significant differences. Now, to me, that made sense because, of course, you know, the union's not going to come out and say, yep, we're actually getting close, when really, like, they did have, you know, certain asks that weren't being met and that we saw today eventually just were not met at all. But I thought there was enough. And then you get to Tuesday, and frankly, I was a little worried in the morning that they were kind of there and not meeting for a couple hours. That kind of, I started to get concerned, and then sure enough, you know, we got the bad news later, shortly after.
Justin, we're going to get into how we got here and what the nuts and bolts of the different proposals were, but I'm curious from your perspective, did you get sucked in? Like, did you get sucked into believing that this was going to happen yesterday or today, these two sort of self-imposed, made up out of thin air deadlines that Rob Manfred and the owners had set up? Did you believe that something was going to get done?
A little bit. It seems like we all got fooled, at least partially, by the league's PR machine via Bob Nightingale and a little bit of John Heyman. But you know, it seemed like what was being discussed was reasonable. The owners wanted 14 teams. The players said no, but we'll do 12. And then Nightingale came out and said they would do 12. And you think that, okay, that's plausible. And I forget the other specifics, but what was being recorded or reported was at least plausible. They hadn't mentioned the CBT stuff, just that the CBT was going to go up. I remember someone saying it would be around 230, and then, of course, it later came out that that's what the players wanted, and that's what the owners were offering at the end of the 5-year CBA. So that wasn't actually, you know, anything close to an agreement. But it's disappointing because I think the league put out that false hope there to, you know, try to turn public opinion against their own players in an attempt to pressure them to take a deal that would be bad for them. And unfortunately, that's kind of been just another piece of their playbook. They didn't be consistent.
Yeah. Shout out to the folks joining us on YouTube, on Facebook, by the way. Our friends at Lakers Nation just commented, can we borrow some players while baseball isn't happening? Mookie, Justin Turner, Cody Bellinger, whoever has the best outside shot. I'm not sure Justin Turner's the guy I'd go for. Mookie Betts, I could see him having some game. Cody Bellinger as well. That's probably where I would lean. But I'm with you. I mean, I was interacting with somebody on Twitter, and they said, what are the odds the deal gets done? And what was funny was I said 70%. I was like, this morning I woke up, I said, I think there's a 70% chance a deal gets done. But then there was also a sneaking suspicion inside of me, because while I went to bed optimistic last night, the more I thought about it, the more I was like, wait, what exactly are the players getting here? Like the deal and the framework that had been laid out, what was sort of the appeal? And I had this moment of like, I wonder if, because the reports again were that the owners were pushing to get something signed last night. The players were the one that said, hey, let's go to bed, 14, 15, 17, whatever the hours of negotiations that went through. That I was like, I wonder if the players wake up this morning and realize that the deal that they were close to signing at 12:45 in the morning or whatever it might be, if this actually wasn't as good of a deal as they thought it was. Sure enough, that's what happened. They wake up, they weren't as pleased with kind of the nuts and bolts that were in front of them. And so here we are. Let's go through a quick timeline really quick, and then we'll get into some nuts and bolts. We'll get to some questions as well. But I think this timeline is important. December 2nd is when the Major League Baseball locked out the players. They were claiming that it was necessary to avoid canceling games, and in order to jumpstart negotiations, the owners locked the players out. Now, this is important to state from the beginning. The owners locked the players out. The owners could have just let this, no CBA, but just let things move along, negotiate without it. They decide not to do that. The owners locked the players out. It wasn't until January 13th, that was 43 days later, that Major League Baseball offers their first proposal. Some of the components of that were a 14-team postseason, which of course is an increase over the current setup, CBT, competitive balance threshold. That's basically a salary cap, as we'll get into, that goes up $4 million and eventually up to $10 million increase of up to 220. So it would be $214 million, which is a $4 million increase over last year for a few years. And then eventually it would make it all the way up to 220. The union at the time was asking for 245. They offered increases to minimum salary of $10,000 per year. And then their major concessions were that they would willing to go to a 3-team draft lottery, and they would remove the qualifying offer situation, which, as we know, has a massive impact on all of like 7 players every season. So that was their offer on January 13th. Now, both sides meet on the 24th and 25th of that month. The union rejects the league's offer, but both sides start to make some progress. February 1st, there's a 90-minute meeting. The players submit their offer. 2 days later, MLB does not respond. They simply request a federal mediator. If you've been following this show, we've gone over that multiple times, how that was a ploy that it would benefit them and nobody else. February 17th, the union offers another formal proposal. February 18th, MLB announces a delay of spring training that starting on February 21st, they would meet every single day, which they did through today, March 1st. Games through April 7th were canceled. So that's kind of the timeline of how we got here. Justin, I'll come to you with this one first. I've been disappointed, depressed, angry about how the owners have handled this process. And again, we're going to get to where their CBT limit's at, all like that kind of thing. But just the 43-day limit, the way they've gone about this, I've sensed from your Twitter that you share some of my frustrations. What has been your perspective of Rob Manfred, the owners, and just the logistics of how they have taken care of this lockout? Oh, I think we lost your audio there, Justin. Matt, I'll come to you. Matt, I'll come to you first, and we'll circle back to Justin here in just a moment. As far as how the owners have handled this logistically, your thoughts?
Not surprised. I mean, pretty expected. As much as the lockout wasn't something that was quote unquote necessary, I think we all sort of knew that if they didn't reach an agreement before the last CBA expired, the lockout was going to happen, right? And sure, in retrospect, the owners could have tried getting it to December or January, and then saying, well, we don't have a deal, now we're going to do a lockout, whatever. But the negotiations they were having the past 2 days and the offers that were being exchanged, like I couldn't help but sort of feel like it was what should have been happening a month ago. Like if this was happening February 1st, arguably spring training starts on time without any issues. We're definitely playing, the games were going to be starting on the 26th. That's happening. But like Justin said earlier, unfortunately, like MLB, like their book and their approach is out. Like it's obvious, and this isn't. We'll get into it, and I'll get into it more later. Like this isn't the '90s where they can kind of send Rob Manfred up to a press conference and he can say revenues are down the last 5 years, and every team's losing money, and we can't spend, and X, Y, and Z because that fans, the majority of fans, there are still some who unfortunately, are a little misguided in what this whole situation has been about. But fans aren't believing it. And credit to a lot of even, national reporters, I feel like more so now than definitely 2020 and, years past, are pushing back on that and not just letting the league get away with saying, well, no, this is what is true. But
yeah, Justin, if you're there, we've got Manfred today was asked why they took 43 days to respond initially, and his answer was something along the lines of, that's what we spent the last 7 days talking about. The answer didn't make any sense. So if your microphone's working, talk me through your response to how MLB has handled this and Rob Manfred specifically. Uh-oh, still on mute. Technical difficulties. We've got to give Justin a shout out here, by the way, because Justin is on East Coast time and is braving the wee hours of the night to be with us.
What about now? I mean, it's textbook bad faith negotiation. They wait 43 days to make their first offer after saying that the lockout was instituted to speed up the negotiations. And the entire time, it's been clear that they're just trying to break the union. I think it was Kyle Glaser, Baseball America, who tweeted something about one particular owner stating that was his goal, and he would go to whatever ends to accomplish it. And, this is an act that we've seen from baseball owners over the last 50 years. We haven't had it probably this aggressive since, like Matt said, in the 90s, because those owners learned after they got an injunction that stopped the strike that they couldn't do that anymore. And this group of owners have placed earning revenues and increasing their franchise values above all else. They place that above the value of the fans, the game, the players. They care first and foremost about their bottom line. And I think that's probably the biggest difference, is that, the game is not being put first. And ultimately, that's where the commissioner should come in and be able to find middle ground between the owners, who are naturally going to have some financial incentive that's going to be a driving force. But that's where the commissioner needs to come in. And instead, he's really just been their
Yeah, I mean, the Manfred will forever be remembered for how terrible he has handled this. It's just pathetic. I mean, and Matt, I think the point that you make is fascinating, and it's something I realized early on. And look, we've got people in the comments that are sharing these perspectives, so it's not like they are alone. But I think historically, the media, corporate media, has sort of just taken the owners' sides, and these players, they're millionaires, they're whiners, they're complaining, et cetera, et cetera. And I really felt like the owners were behaving as if that was still the case. They were behaving as if they could just get away with murder, because all Rob Manfred has to do is come out and say, we're losing money. Hey, we tried. Hey, there was momentum and they blew it. And everybody would just believe them, because that's what's happened in every single scenario, basically every negotiation for the past 20 years. And yet for the first time, you've got Jeff Passan absolutely torching people. You've got Evan Drellich from The Athletic absolutely torching people. Andy McCullough, basically everybody at The Athletic, not named Jim Bowden, who, look, I mean, we don't need to get into him, but everybody there is torching the owners and saying they're out of touch. This is delusional. Even Ken Rosenthal, who has historically not been a hot take guy, but who was just like, this is madness. Like, here's the deal that everybody should be agreeing to. And he sent that a month ago. So I just felt like for the first time, those rules had changed, and yet Rob Manfred didn't appear to notice. He's up there today laughing at a press conference, talking about how, thinking he can rewrite the narrative, like, we care about the game of baseball, we just want to make it better. And it's like, there's no evidence we've seen over the past month to make us believe that. So Justin, I mean, do you agree with that sense that, the owners have just misread the room, misplayed the situation, or is it even worse in that they simply don't care?
I think it's both. I think they've overplayed their hand and expected that, their PR machine would be able to kind of grease the skids a little bit easier. I think they expected that the union would not be as formidable, not be as unified. I think their actions have contributed to that unity. And yeah, I think they probably they just don't care. They're willing to lose a significant portion of the season because they know that they get a lot of revenue from the playoffs, and they've seen that a shorter season can be successful after 2020. I think they know that, even though they're going to lose revenue, ultimately, if they break the union, it'll work out in the end, and we'll still be fine with a shorter season. So
I was just going to say, they take the
ahead.
short-term loss of, hey, we're going to lose money for the next month, 2 months, 3 months by losing Gate. But if we get an absolute killer CBA for the next 5 years, it's going to be great news for us.
Yeah, and you look, Rob Manfred, I think you can probably call him a good lawyer, but he is absolutely horrible at PR. And that's been the case for a few years now. But, he really has shown a lot of tone deafness, and the players notice. I think when he says that investing in a Major League Baseball team is not as good as investing in the stock market, when, that's not like those values are private. We know what the franchises sell for. We've seen the accumulation of franchise values over the last 2 decades, how much they've gone up. Look no further than Frank McCourt, who, bought the team through debt finance and came out with billions of dollars, even though a lot of it went to Jamie McCourt as well. You have to look no further than that to see that these owners, all they have to do is buy into a team, wait a couple decades, and they will make billions of dollars. And the players want their fair share, and they're not getting it.
Yeah, we've got somebody in the comments sort of saying, hey, they're trying to fleece the owners, they're getting greedy, etc. Let me just break down some numbers, because I think that's an easy narrative to believe until you actually look at where things are at. So let's get to the nuts and bolts of current offers that both the owners and players have made and sort of the gap between them, okay? So the first is the competitive balance threshold. Again, let's talk about this real quick. This is the lowest of 3 thresholds, each of which carries a penalty associated with it. Historically, that has been both a financial penalty of like 20% tax on the first threshold, as well as additional draft pick forfeitures if you were to cross them. The idea being the owners would like you to believe, hey, it's not a salary cap. You can spend as much money as you want. It's just going to cost you a little bit of extra money at the top, and it's going to cost you a draft pick if you want to go over it. The problem is, functionally, it operates like a salary cap. The only 2 teams went over it last year. That would be the Dodgers and the Padres. The Padres were barely over it. There were 5 teams within like $3 million. This is operating as a salary cap. So last year it was $214 million was the very bottom. Major League Baseball has offered to raise that number to $220 million, with the caveat that it would not increase in either 2023 or 2024. So it would be 220, 220, 220. Then it would go up to 224. Then it would go up to $230 million. This was their final offer. It's worth noting. Okay, this was after they had come up. By the way, it's also worth noting they wanted to double the penalties at every single one of these levels. So to say that the owners were trying to get, like, that the owners were conceding anything, they were offering a worse deal to the players, even in their last offer, than the players had previously. The union had come down to $238 million in the first year, $244, $250, $256, and $263. So we're about $18 million apart in the first year, up to $33 million in the 5th year. Here's the important point to the people in the chat that are saying, hey, the players are getting greedy. Relative to inflation, that Major League Baseball was lowering the thresholds. Okay? The increase in thresholds was not even keeping up with inflation. So to say that the players should take their gains, there were no gains on the competitive balance threshold. That's number 1. Number 2 issue was the bonus pool. This would be spread out across pre-arbitration players, pre-free agency players, okay? The union was asking for $85 million and a $5 million increase each year. That was down from $105, which was their first offer. The Major League Baseball started at $10 million. They were up to $30 million. Okay, so let me point something out here. The gap between these is $55 million total in 1 year. Divide $55 million over 30 teams. That's not even $2 million per team, and we can't agree. $2 million Owners can't afford $2 million to just close this gap. That was if they just met them entirely where the players had come. The owners refused, okay? Now let's talk about league minimums. The union was asking for a $725,000 minimum, which would go up $20,000 in 2023, again in 2024, and then would increase based on inflation. That was a $50,000 decrease from where they started. Major League Baseball was $700,000 in year one, up to $740,000 in 2026. They actually came up from $600,000. If I'm going to be as fair and unbiased as I can, this was the one area where I feel like Major League Baseball actually stepped up to the plate. This was the largest increase that would have ever happened in minimum salaries ever. Would have been a $130,000 increase. Now, of course, it came with tons of strings attached, but if we're just evaluating that one on the surface level, that one's reasonable. They also agreed on a few things. The universal DH seemed to be agreed upon. Major League Baseball wanted you to believe that was a give up of theirs. Everybody wanted it. There was seemingly agreement on a 12-team postseason, which I hate. And there was also seemingly agreement on a draft lottery. I believe they ended at 5 teams, although the players were at one point asking for 7 teams. So that's kind of the nuts and bolts. Matt, I'll come to you. When you look at the gaps on the CBT, the bonus pool, the minimum, I would say those are the 3 key areas that we did not find resolution on. What stands out to you about those 3 categories?
Yeah, I mean, first I'll start off by just kind of prefacing everything. I think, and specific to kind of the comment we received about the players getting greedy, I think a significant issue is that the last CBA was so pro owners. Like, the players were fighting such a huge uphill battle that they were determined to, to really not let anything remotely 50-50, maybe 51-49 happen, it seems, right? And you can't necessarily fault them. What I do think maybe they kind of maybe hurt themselves from, and this is just my assessment and kind of speculation, was it made clear of like, hey, these are our priorities, these are them kind of ranked type thing? Because I do agree with you in terms of the minimum salary, MLB did step up. Now the issue with, and we'll get into it with a lot of things, is when you say MLB did do this, well, it also is, but it includes, X, Y, and Z. And so, fine, give MLB credit for, okay, agreeing to aggressively raise the minimum salary, but obviously that wasn't necessarily the main issue that the Players Association had, right? Because otherwise we probably would have reached an agreement. So now you shift to the luxury tax thresholds, and the marginal increase that MLB proposed just for year one was ridiculous. Yeah. Like, I mean, come on. But then to say it's going to be that same number for years 1, 2, and 3 of a CBA, like, that just screams like you guys really aren't negotiating here. Like why are you even presenting that? Like, that's just a waste of time. And then you want to factor in, which they finally backed off of it, but MLB wanted to also increase all the penalties for teams that went past each threshold. So it's like, you're not only A, refusing to raise it to a reasonable number, but B, you want to further penalize teams that go past it. So there's that. And then, the pre-arbitration bonus pool, that one I think is a little bit tricky because it is something that was going to be, and I think we still will get it whenever a CBA is agreed to, completely new, right? This concept isn't something that's been around before. So maybe both parties are trying to figure out, well, we can't necessarily, from MLB standpoint, we can't necessarily set the value, the money that we're going to put aside too high, because then in the next CBA, who knows what it could increase to. So fine, I can understand that. And again, from the players' perspective, I think, they, like I said, they felt they pretty much got railroaded in the last CBA, and so they're going to go for every possible dollar at this point. And that just made for the situation that we're in now, where negotiating, like, it's just it
Justin,
was a bad
I've got
mixture.
people in the chat, and I know you've heard the same thing I have. Hey, you know what? It takes 2 here. We didn't come to an agreement, therefore both sides must be at fault. Do you agree with that assessment?
Absolutely not. Well, yes, it takes 2. It also takes 2 sides to be reasonable. One side has come into this reasonable. One side has made significant concessions. I think one thing that maybe you didn't mention was the players' union's request to increase Super 2 eligibility to all second-year players. Then they came down to 85. Then they came down to 80. Then they came down to 75. And then they came down to 35%, just a 13% increase in the percentage of second-year players who would receive arbitration. And the ownership contingent said, no, we're not negotiating on that. If you do the math, like 13%. That's like what? One player per team every 4 or 5 years who goes to arbitration, who wouldn't otherwise go to arbitration. That's what they're saying no to. So yes, it takes two. It takes two reasonable parties willing to make concessions. And one point I want to hit on, you mentioned the CBA is not even, meeting inflation. You also have to remember that revenues are increasing. So not only is it not tracking with inflation, it's not tracking the league's increase in revenues. And in sports with salary caps like basketball and football, players get a set percentage of revenue. And while we don't know what the set percentage is because most baseball teams don't have their books open, we do know that the Braves, who have their books open because of their corporate owners, they spent 28% of their revenue on payroll. That's nowhere close. That's 20% less than the other major leagues. And if the Braves are doing that in a season where they won a championship, they can go further.
No, I mean, one of the things that strikes me as I go down this list of, because I'm with you, the whole it takes two, the best analogy I said is that'd be like saying if Matt walked up to me from behind and just sucker punched me in the back of the head and said, hey, there was a fight and it took two people to fight. It's like, well, yeah, technically there was his fist in my head and technically we were both involved in that. But just because there's a fight doesn't mean two people are responsible. Just because there is a lockout and no agreement can be reached does not mean. Let me, again, think about this from the perspective of owners, okay? The competitive balance threshold, CBT. Major League Baseball refuses to close a $18 million gap. Remind yourself what the CBT is real quick. It is not a requirement to spend this money. They could raise this to $500 million if they wanted to. It would not be a requirement for the Rays or the A's or the Rockies or any of these teams who have an interest in not spending money. All this is allowing other teams to spend money. They could raise this. It would cost them literally $0 to raise this. Okay, that's number one. The bonus pool, we've been over this. To meet the union's ask right now would cost each owner less than $2 million. Okay, let's go to the minimum. There's a $25,000 gap. And if we want to go even further than that, it's about let's say $50,000 per player gap by the time you get to the end of it. Let's assume there's 25 players on each roster, major league roster. I think that's the average, who's earning the minimum, okay, the 40-man roster. 25 people times $50,000, okay? You don't have to be a crazy math person to know that that's what, like $1 million, $1.5 million? So the owners could literally go to all three of these and they could go to the union. They say, fine, you can have your CBT at 238. Doesn't mean we're going to spend it, but we're going to let the Dodgers spend it if they want to. Fine. The bonus pool, $85 million. Fine. The minimum, $725 going up to $70-65 plus inflation over years 4 and 5. That would cost them $4 million. That's what it would cost the owners to just on all three of these to say, oh, and by the way, they're getting 12-team playoffs, which is, I believe, an $85 million increase. So that's almost $3 million per team right there, right off the bat. I mean, those are even numbers, okay? So that part to me is mind-blowing. But here, now I'm going to get to some more numbers. You know, folks, if you're watching that I'm a numbers guy, Justin referenced some of these. So here we go. Buckle up, okay? In the last 4 years, player pay has declined $200 million, while the average team value has grown $300 million. The average owner is worth $1.6 billion solely on owning the team. That has nothing to do with assets outside of the team. The team itself, on average, $1.6 billion with a B, okay? Here's one from Miles Nelson on Twitter. The players since 2009, Justin, you referenced this, have made less than 45% of league revenue. The NFL and NBA guarantee 46% to their players per their CBA. MLB's new proposal would lock players in at under 40% for the next 5 years. Now, that's a guess because we don't have everybody's numbers. It's actually potentially way less. But this new CBA, if they had signed it, would be less than 40% of revenues, okay? Here we go, 2003 to 2011. That was 2 CBAs worth of time. There was a 52% increase in the competitive balance threshold. From 2012 to 2021, there was just an 18% increase to the competitive balance threshold. So when Rob Manfred says, hey, we increased in commensurate with previous agreements, that is complete BS. The numbers are right in front of us. I've got one more for you. Between 2015 and 2019, MLB revenues have gone up 30%. That's $2.5 billion. The average salary in Major League Baseball has gone down 6.4%. The median salary has gone down 30%. And as we've discussed, the franchise values have gone through the roof. So revenues are going up, values are going up, player salaries are going down. Median salaries are going down relative to all of this. Everything is going down. I think it's a total mess. I think it's a total disaster. And the fact that all of this is in front of us, the fact that we have access to the players telling us, Matt, this is a PR nightmare for Major League Baseball from my perspective. But my question, which maybe is more important, is does it matter? Does it matter that none of this makes sense? Does it matter that it's a PR nightmare? Or do they just sit there and say, that's fine. That's all fine. At some point, the players are going to come running back. They're going to sign a CBA. You all are going to keep showing up to stadiums and shelling out money, and everything's going to be fine here at the end of the day.
I mean, I think that owners can probably bank on a healthy number of fans still coming back to the sport once it starts again, because, I mean, fans enjoy it, right? And it's, as much as this is a frustrating period for everybody, once baseball games are starting, like, it's then out of sight, out of mind. Like, the new CBAs agreed to, like, maybe the players won, maybe they didn't, but hey, I'm going to go see, Mookie Betts play right field tonight, or maybe the Dodgers have him at second base. They're going to, mix it up a little bit. But my concern is how and when are we going to get there? Because the union has spent the past couple of years, preparing themselves for this type of fight. And, before we came on, I saw there was an interview, a Canada-based outlet with Ross Stripling, and he said, the owners tried to sneak stuff past us at their deadline, which we never agreed to and signed off on. And so, we anticipated them trying to pull something like that. Andrew Miller, during the MLBPA press conference today after Rob Manfred spoke, said, we're prepared basically for however long this is going to be. We knew this was coming. So now for me, like, that's my concern. The union is definitely together. They're not fractured by any means, which I think MLB had kind of hoped for and had benefited from in years past. So from a PR standpoint, I could see it going either way, just because, we're getting comments still in the chat of, hey, the players are being greedy. The players, need to just play. They still getting it's millionaires and billionaires, which has been dispelled time and time again. But unfortunately, the narrative is still out there. So my concern, more so than PR, is just like, when will this end? Because I feel like owners are emboldened in their stance, and the union
Justin,
has been
in your mind,
for this.
what's the roadmap here to this coming back? I mean, where are you at optimism wise? I mean, is this going to be next week? We're talking about a deal. Are we talking 3 months from now? Like, how do you see this playing out in the coming weeks and months?
Well, there's no reason for them to stop talking. Yeah. This was a fake deadline that was generated by the owners to try to spur some action. They negotiated the players into the night, hoping that they would break, or like Ross Stripling said, not notice some kind of provision that they snuck in there. It didn't work, and now they're canceling games. But no one's saying that they have to stop negotiating. This was a completely arbitrary deadline, which is why they were able to move it 15 hours or whatever they did, from Monday at midnight to Tuesday at 5 p.m. So there's no reason for them to stop negotiating. That said, it doesn't seem like there will be immediate negotiations. I think both sides will probably recess. If I'm correct, the league made the last offer, so presumably the players' union will make a counter offer at some point, hopefully soon. I don't think they want to extenuate this delay. But the league has to come to the table, and they have to be willing to meet the players in the middle on more than just minimum salaries. I think the biggest thing there is the CBT, because, as Matt Scherzer said today, it's been used like a salary cap for basically all but 3 or 4 teams. And even the teams that do go over it, they try to get back under after a couple of years and reset the penalties. So salary cap, de facto salary cap, it's been used like one, only without the players having a guaranteed percentage of revenue like the salary cap sports.
And without a salary floor, which is a critical part of it, right? Like in all these other, like in NBA, in NFL, you are required to spend a certain percentage of the cap over a 3-year period, no matter what. So, Justin, I'll come to you with what is a complex question, but you're a smart guy that I'm sure has kicked this around. Would MLB just be better off with an official salary cap? Like, I saw somebody on Twitter, I'll forget the name, so I apologize to whoever this was, but they were like, MLB's the players' trump card here should be fine. You know what? We'll do a salary cap. The reason being, then owners would have to open up books. It would have to be tied to a percentage of revenue. It would create a salary floor. Obviously, the players' union has resisted a salary cap. They're the only sport that doesn't have one. And yet, if you have a de facto salary cap without any of the benefits of a salary cap, Are they better off just requesting one?
I mean, you really hit all the key factors there. There are benefits that come with a salary cap, namely the owners opening the books and showing the players, here's what we make and here's what your percentage is. Now, if I'm correct, the league did propose like a hard cap of about 180 million with a floor of like 100 million, and that's just laughable. That's like 30 million or 40 million below the CBT number, and it's just not realistic to even make that as an opening offer is laughable. So, but if you had a salary cap, let's say 275 million with a floor of like 120, 130, 140 million, I think that's a decent deal, especially if you did a fixed percentage of revenue. Although arguably, if the revenue is fixed and you look at the other leagues and it's like 45, 46%, it should even be above 250. But there are benefits to it if the number is right. I just don't think the league would go as far to make the number right.
Yeah, I mean, the ironic part is, I think you said 180 was the high end, and it's $30 million, $34 million under last year's CBT. The flip side is, if the floor was 100 million, there's about 5 teams in Major League Baseball that would need to step up their spending over the next few years, because there's teams that literally have grievances filed against them right now because they didn't even spend the amount of money that was distributed to them as a part of revenue sharing. It's absolutely pathetic. Matt, do you have any take on a salary cap? I mean, again, it's never going to happen because this is like the hill that the union wants to die on. But it's like, if you're going to get crappy CBT setups with a fake salary cap, I don't know. I just keep coming back to forcing the owner's hand and saying, fine, we want it tied to your books, open them up. Is that a good thing in your mind?
Like Justin said, if the numbers are reasonable and appropriate, then sure, it could work out for everybody. But I don't see MLB getting to that point. And so because of that, the system, I know a lot of people have kind of said that it's broken and this new CBA needed to fix it and completely rewrite it. I don't necessarily believe that to be true. It just, the players just want a little bit more of the pie. And all the numbers you touched on are reasonable dollars that owners can split with and pay and get the sport back on track, and then everybody is kind of, profiting and making revenue and all that. So because I don't trust the owners to kind of, negotiate a salary cap and floor in good faith, I don't see that system really being viable for MLB. And frankly, I think we also need to call into question, I don't think it's this isn't a hot take by any means to say not every team is trying to win. Not every owner cares about having to would care about having to reach a salary floor. And so if you set one, then you're going to upset, a handful of probably smaller markets who aren't in the business of trying to make the playoffs, even if, they do. And that's a whole nother thing, which an expanded postseason, going 14 teams, like Jeff, you and I have talked about it, it's not going to influence the Pirates to all of a sudden go for it. They're going to say, no, we can win 75 games and still sneak in. Why are we going to spend more?
Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up, because when I look at the way that Major League Baseball has gone about this, it's abundantly clear that money matters far more than the game. And that probably sounds obvious to a lot of people. They're like, well, duh, what did you think? But it's I think, Justin, you pointed this out on Twitter. The gap between going to a 12-team playoff versus a 14-team playoff was only $15 million. And then you think about the gap between a 10-team playoff and a 12-team playoff, and you're like, okay, so we're going to expand postseason dramatically for $3 million a team. That's the incentive, when there's not a single person out there that is like, oh my goodness, this is going to be so much better for the game. Right? Anti-tanking measures, where it's Major League, the union had proposed this elaborate situation with small market teams and big market. Admittedly, I didn't even fully understand it, but it was who's opposed to anti-taking stuff? Why is there a single owner out there that is no draft lottery, you should be able to lose on purpose and benefit from it? All of these things that they're pushing back on. And again, the CBT, it does not require anybody to spend up to that level. But the problem for the Rockies, and I'll just use them as an example because their owner has been front and center in all of this, and we know what a joke of an organization they are and what a joke of an owner he is. But it's the Rockies basically say, we don't want to spend any money, but we also want you to make it so that other people can't spend their money and other people can't be better. The Dodgers aren't allowed to spend their money that they're making and profiting. We should all just I shouldn't be punished. One of the things too, and this is a tangent, but an international draft, it's we should do an international draft. everybody gets the same amount of money right now. Like, basically. I mean, the Dodgers get less because of some other things, but all that's required in international is having great international scouts, so investing in scouting, and then being and creating an organization that people are interested in coming to. The best teams do not always get the best prospects on the international market, but you go to a draft for one simple reason. You want to save money, and you want to make your own life easier. And so, Justin, I'll come to you with this one because I feel like you and I are probably aligned on this. Do you agree with Matt and myself when you look down the line of this, that to make an argument that the owners actually care about the game of baseball is actually a very difficult thing to make after a week like we just had?
Yes, absolutely. And I don't remember who wrote this. I wish I could give them credit. But someone this past week, or maybe it was last week, wrote, the owners would like to win, all things being equal. If the costs were the same, yeah, sure, they'd love to win. But if it's more profitable to lose, there are a lot of owners in this league who would just prefer to lose and collect their profits and sit on their rising, increasing asset that is this Major League Baseball team. And really, it's pathetic because you have these billionaire owners who just aren't spending money on the team and then claim they're too poor. If they're too poor, they should sell the team. They should collect a couple $1 billion and sell to someone who will actually invest in the team. And I don't think that's a crazy thing to say. That owners who aren't willing to spend should be forced out.
Justin, I'm curious, like I saw somebody tweet, I wish Major League Baseball had a Mark Cuban type owner because he'd be all out in the public going crazy. And I think Steve Cohen is probably as close as we have. But I'm curious for you, Justin, like what is Steve Cohen and the Dodgers ownership group and the Red Sox ownership group and the Yankees ownership group, like these organizations that run themselves the way that teams are supposed to be run? And look, there are small market teams that are doing the best that they can. Like we can make fun of the Rays and how much they spend. Guess what? They freaking win. So I'm not going to criticize the Rays and how they run their organization. But there's plenty of teams, small market and large market, who love and care about the game of baseball, who are open to investing up to their own limits. Like, we don't hear from them. Like, I don't know, like, do you think, Justin, that those folks behind the scenes are absolutely losing their mind because the reality is they want the same things that we want as fans and that the players want, is just to shell out an extra $5 million, make the game a better game, and open it up to have people watch? Like, do you think there's a contingent that is pushing back like that?
I'm not going to sit here and assume that because I really don't know. I think, they're probably more willing to increase the CBT than, say, Bob Nutting of Pittsburgh or Milwaukee Brewers owner Mark Atancio. But we don't know that for sure. And you brought up the Red Sox. The Red Sox 2 years ago traded Mookie Betts for financial flexibility. They would not sign him to a long-term deal. And this is, like the fourth or fifth biggest market team in the sport. So this isn't just purely a small market issue. It's across a variety of markets. And the unfortunate thing is, even if they were behind the scenes privately opposed, the Dodgers, the Mets, the Yankees, whoever, you need 23 votes. And if you have 8 small market owners who are willing to hold out until they absolutely get the deal that they want, they can force Manfred's hand, unfortunately. And I don't think that's what's going on here. But in theory,
and Manfred doesn't exactly give me confidence to believe that he's in that room rallying votes and convincing people of things that they don't want. He feels like a lackey who it's like, yes, sir. Happy to help you, sir. How can I help you, sir? That kind of a thing. Let me get you guys out of here on this, Matt. I'll start with you. What does the next week, month look like? I mean, what's your prediction about how this plays out? Like, when do negotiations reboot? Is it tomorrow? Is it a week from now? When do games start? Is there possible we miss the whole season? Give me some crazy predictions about how the rest of this year plays out.
Oh, man. Well, I will say, I'll tie in my answer to your question earlier about a PR scenario. I think one thing Major League Baseball needs to be mindful of is Jackie Robinson Day. In the middle of April, it's obviously a big moment for Major League Baseball, and even his Robinson's impact obviously extends beyond the sport, but this is also the 75th anniversary for it. So is that something you can really afford to miss? Probably not. And if you do, I think that's where maybe the league may end up taking a PR hit. And if you get further into the calendar, here we go again with the All-Star game at Dodger Stadium. I know it's a little early right now to be talking about it, but we saw it in 2020. Obviously, different circumstances now than what the world was going through then. But, maybe that gets missed as well. And even if it doesn't necessarily get quote unquote missed, if the season starts too late, do they have to change it? And I don't know. Anyway.
Well, that means the Dodgers are going to win the World Series, so that's the good news that comes out of all this.
Yeah.
We could play 20 games and win a World Series. You will not hear me complaining 1 outs, okay? Okay, so Matt, I'm going to push you here, Matt. So give me a prediction of. I mean, you mentioned Jackie Robinson Day. That would mean we would need a deal theoretically in the next week or so.
Yeah, so I'll go with opening day is Jackie Robinson Day, and I think they get a deal done within the next 2 weeks, and then spring training is a little bit shorter than everybody would have liked, but they're kind of up against the calendar.
See, this is why we have you guys here. Matt's over here telling me about Jackie Robinson Day and the 75th anniversary nugget I did not know, and Justin's over here naming owners of the Milwaukee Brewers and teams that, it's like this is the type of content that you guys come for. So, Justin, I'll come to you. Give me a prediction about how this plays out, when we might see guys back on the field in real meaningful Major League Baseball games.
I'm a little more pessimistic. I think I actually didn't know it was the 75th anniversary, and Matt's right. Like that would be a definite PR hit. I just don't think the owners care that much. So
you don't think civil rights issues are on the top of the mind of sports owners, Justin? Are you suggesting something with there?
If you've seen the San Francisco Giants owner donations, maybe you get a sense of what his priorities are. Not that issue, but I think we probably don't see games until May, maybe Memorial Day weekend, if I'm being, truly pessimistic. I think what happened this week with the owners pushing out, oh yeah, we're getting a deal done, when in reality they weren't close to getting the deal done, and they're still far apart on the most significant issue, which is the CBT, and that's an issue where they really have not moved much at all. So until we see some movement on the CBT issue from the ownership side, or the players just cave, I think it's really hard to see something coming together soon.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think I'm with you. I like what Matt said, because I think the storyline makes sense, and I would like to believe in my heart of hearts that the owners and Major League Baseball care about these type of things. Based on the fact that I don't think they care about the game of baseball, it's hard for me to believe they care about Jackie Robinson Day, as significant as that might be. But I'm with you. I'm pessimistic. And part of the reason is because I really think the players have a resolve now that the owners are not used to. I think the players having access to fans via social media, I think the players having access to reporters, the players having folks like Jeff Passan and Evan Drellich and some of the leading voices in Major League Baseball coverage on their side is only going to strengthen them. They are not hearing from people every day, you're crazy, you're wrong, you're greedy. They're not getting pressured from fans. They're getting encouragement from fans. I woke up this morning and said, as much as I'd love a deal to come down today, if the players get screwed, I'm not sure I'm going to be happy that baseball is back tomorrow, because of how much I desperately want them to at least just get back on the path to equality here. And just sort of a fair deal. And that's the key, right? Like the players aren't trying to win back everything they lost in the last CBA, but the trajectory of things matters. The reason that year 1 and year 5 of the competitive balance threshold matters is because it sets a trajectory that is the starting point for negotiations the next CBA. And so it's not about short-term gains. It's about setting up yourself for success in the next 5 years so that the next negotiation is easier and you can incrementally get back towards 50-50 or fair. So I'm with you. I think the owners have misread. There's nothing that I have seen that makes me believe Rob Manfred understands the gravity of what he's dealing with, to make me believe that Rob Manfred understands what he is up against with the players. And so I think in his mind, in the owner's mind, they're sitting back and they're laughing and they're saying, these guys are going to come running to us in 2 weeks with an offer and we're going to get everything we want. And I think they're dead wrong. I think the players are pissed. I think they're pissed about Manfred and how he's acted and behaved for the last 4 or 5 years. People keep referencing the piece of metal comment that he made about the trophy. Today he's smiling and laughing and players are screenshotting it. I think there is genuine anger. And I really think that when this thing gets signed, it's going to be closer to what the union wants than what the owners want, which tells me we're going to be here a while. Because I don't think the owners are going to get to that point this week or next week or even possibly next month. I really think we're multiple months away possibly from getting this done, because I've gotten my hopes up and I've been let down, and I really think that the players left this with a resolve to say, nope, we're missing games at this point. Fine, so be it. Because, by the way, the other thing that's worth noting, now that we have canceled games, the other piece, in addition to the CBT and the bonus pool and everything else, now they have to negotiate how much money the players get paid this year if they play, say, 150 or 140 games. So add in, now there is a new most contentious item on the agenda. It is not the competitive balance threshold or a bonus pool or the minimum salary. It is how many games are we playing and how much are you paying us? I don't think there's going to be an agreement. So I'll admit I'm pessimistic on this one, but we'll see what happens. Just looking through the comments real quick, we've got lots of Manfred needs to vanish. That's from Jeff H. Mr. Cat right behind him saying 100%. Jason, this is interesting. We need a 10 to 12 year CBA. I don't think the players are going to sign up for that, because if they had the last one and that had to last 10 to 12 years, I'm not sure baseball would be in good shape as it's going. HG says it's interesting how the owners aren't publicly calling out the holdout owners, and Justin kind of agreed with that. First of all, we don't know what their beliefs are. There might not be holdout owners. They all might be unanimous in their agreement. We don't know, but we'll see how this plays out. So Justin, Matt, I appreciate you guys joining me tonight. Obviously, I wish we had better news. We were hoping this was going to be a live show that talked about how a deal was reached and opening day was just around the corner, and the players got the man. But here we are. It's games have been canceled. I believe it's through April 7th. It's the first week of games, the first two series for most teams. And again, there's no scheduled talks at this point between the two sides. They can negotiate at any point. Justin, I think you said the players are kind of due up to make their next proposal. But, I mean, we know where both sides sit. Like, basically, both of them have made proposals that, to some extent, they've claimed is their last best offer, or maybe not their last best offer if you're Rob Manfred. But we'll see what happens. So, again, that's Justin Lorber. You can check out his stuff at Future Dodgers on Twitter, futuredodgers.com as well. Matt Moreno's the editor of DodgerBlue.com. You can check him out at M Moreno. I always want to say Moreno. It's M Moreno 1015 on Twitter. My name's Jeff Spiegel. As always, check out DodgerBlue.com, DodgerBlue1958 on social media. And please, if you're here on YouTube, ring the notification bell, click subscribe as well. We appreciate you joining us. We'll see you next time.